Good afternoon, Jack.
Good afternoon, Jean. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today on our webinar regarding Middle East projects, just before ADIPEC that will start next week. I suggest we start right away. First information we want to share with you, it's actually information on the next webinar. The date is already settled. It will be 16th of January, so after the Christmas break that is already coming quite fast. And we will be looking at 2024. Let's make a recap of what happened in 2024, and then we'll share with you the first forecast of 2025. You will anyway receive the slides. You will receive also the invitation for next webinar. So don't bother taking any screenshot. You have all the materials with you later on. Regarding the agenda today, we'll start with some information, obviously, on ADIPEC, and then we'll dive directly in the market news. In actually Middle East, there is actually quite a lot to say currently, and then we will focus on the key players, some specificities on the market, and we'll end up with the project outlook. If you have any question, don't hesitate to ask them in the chat, and we'll just address them at the end of the presentation. Regarding ADIPEC, we will have a booth over there, which is booth 9355. There will always be somebody here on the stand, so don't hesitate to stop by and visit us. I guess Jean and myself will be a lot also walking around. So if you have a booth, we will also visit you on yours. If you're just a visitor, don't hesitate to book a meeting event with us to be sure that we are there. On the French pavilion when you are, so we don't chase after each other. I suggest we start with the core of the subject. Jean, I'll let you maybe introduce the news on the market.
Thank you, Jack. And obviously, we made this webinar just right before ADIPEC, so we're happy to see all of you next Monday. So in 3 days now, it's coming quick. As Jack said, we'll be running around, okay, because there is a lot of people to see. So if you're a visitor or if you really want to take a moment with us, shoot us an email to Jack or myself, and we'll be pleased to arrange something to make sure that we don't cross and miss each other in this great exhibition. So now we start a little bit by what is happening on the market, especially for Middle East. There would be a lot of things to say, but we wanted to, I would say, describe a little bit the environment about this market, and starting by the gas market and going by, I would say, what were the historical position of Middle East compared to the rest of the planet. And as you can see here on this graph, you have all the, I would say, production of gas per region, and Middle East appear here in yellow, right in the middle of the graph. And you see that on the last few years, especially following, I would say, a huge development of Qatar gas, which is now Qatar Energy, Middle East has become quite a big player into this market. Not all the countries have access to gas in the region, but Qatar and Iran are the best driver. And what is quite interesting is to see that this part now is evolving, but okay, slowly, I would say, compared to the previous edition. It will grow, but I would say as much as the market will grow. So we have come from a position where I would say Middle East was a growing force into the gas market to a position where Middle East is more or less established on this market. You see they are quite smaller in comparison to US and Canada both together, or to Russia, but still an active player on this market, which is quite balanced over the planet. Of course, there's the situation for gas, and for oil, the situation is a little bit different. I found this graph from Macrobond, which is quite interesting, I think, where on the last 15 years, more or less, you can see the evolution of production per country. So UAE at the top, for the big part, Saudi Arabia, then you find at the bottom Iran, Iraq, Kuwait. And you see that the production has been quite stable, fluctuating slowly despite, I would say, if we accept COVID, between 25 and 30 million barrels per day, which is quite massive. And here you see in the same timing the blue curve, which is a market share of Middle East countries into this market. And what is quite funny is to see how the fluctuation has been going around 30% of market share for Middle East. And I plotted in red here the different period and era where OPEC countries decided to make a price war. Because if you are thinking about OPEC and this cartel, the main mantra of this cartel is to maintain the market share at least above 30% of global production. And each time you see that the curve is passing below this 30%, it corresponds quite nicely to a price war that they have started. Last one being during COVID, where of course they went really, really, really low on the price of the barrel, and which completely destroyed partly the US independent oil producer. And why this graph is interesting is because today, here the figure stop for 2023, but for 2024, we have passed below this 29% of market share today. And as we could anticipate it, and Aramco has been quite vocal or starting to be vocal about it, they are not so happy about this position to have less than 30%. So they might be inclined to start a price war and to go really low on the price of oil. Because I mean that's a little bit why OPEC was created, and to be honest, OPEC is now starting a shift for the last, I would say, year and even more month. OPEC Plus the decision was to make production cuts and to reduce the volume of production. It was not followed by all the countries of OPEC Plus, let's be clear. It was mostly followed by Saudi Arabia and the UAE. But those production costs were quite massive, to be honest, because we are talking about 4 million barrels per day, so quite a huge volume. And the idea was to maintain originally the price of oil around $100 per barrel to finance, of course, all the infrastructure. The only problem that while OPEC Plus was trying to decrease and reduce their production, you had other competitors like Brazil and especially US, which were, I would say, producing even more, so compensating all those efforts. So after 1 year without real effect on the price, the Saudis, and I think with the good help of UAE, is going to re-inject a lot of production into the market, trying to decrease the price. And from this table, which is quite complex, you can understand that here, if you take the line of Saudi Arabia, today they are producing about supplying to the market 9 million barrels per day. UAE, it's 3 million barrels per day. But their capacity today that they have already developed is 12 and 4.3. So you can imagine that from one day to another, Saudi and UAE can decide to re-inject on the market 4 million barrels per day not in a day, okay, let's say in weeks, but of course they can really inject a lot of product to the market and of course collapse the price in the meantime. So clearly here there is quite a situation with OPEC where they will go from, I would say, production cost to, I would say, full gas supply to the market. And OPEC Plus is also suffering from a different problematic. And this problematic is a situation between Middle East and Russia. Because for a long time, Russia was, I would say, supplying the market of Europe with its gas and its oil. And of course, following the Ukraine situation, Russia has been shifting its supply to Asiatic countries. And the problem that you can imagine is that today you end up in a situation where Middle East and Russia are becoming competitors, especially in markets like China and India. And Asia, before, I would say this shift in supply was quite a key market for Middle East countries. And here I did find a graph, which is quite interesting, of the top oil exporter to China on the years 2022 and 2023. And you see how quick the shift was from Russia to supply even more to China than what they were doing before. And of course, it was, I would say, for Saudi Arabia, a step back because more Russia, of course, was supplying less, Saudis could do it. There is one point I need to explain in this graph is Malaysia, because Malaysia is clearly not providing this amount of oil to China. Most likely it's Irani's oil, which has been labeled as Malaysia through different shadow fleet. But just to enlighten the fact that I would say before OPEC Plus was working very well because Russia and the Middle East countries had all different markets, but today they are becoming quite competitors on the same market, which is the Asiatic market. So of course, this I would say cordial agreement between friends is no more lasting, and we are starting to see the first, I would say, reaction of Middle East countries following, trying to fight a little bit against Russia on those markets. And since June, for example, we took you 3 points. Since June, Saudi Arabia has accepted to be partly paid in yuan, so renminbi, which is a Chinese money, for their supply of oil, where before it was out of question not to be paid with US dollar. So it gives a little bit an idea of how much they are trying to grab on this market. And at the opposite, we see Saudi's project being more and more reliant on Chinese contractor. Also because it's a good way to have partners from China and to build up, I would say, economic relationship with the country. In the meantime, it's a good way to recycle your yuan because if you go to Saudi Arabia like me, you don't see them driving Chinese car a lot, but that's a different topic. The last point, which is showing really this beginning of tension and competition between Middle East and Russia for the Chinese market, was Aramco and ADNOC strategy on the last 2 years, where they have acquired about 15 refineries and petrochem complexes directly in China and in India. Okay, so it's quite big assets as they have bought. And of course, as soon as Aramco, ADNOC is the owner of the refinery in China, they are the ones supplying the oil to this refinery. So again, it was a really a smart strategical move to buy those assets to make sure that they could secure their supply to those countries as well. So again, it would shift a little bit the situation with OPEC Plus and with the dynamic of projects in those countries. The last point that is part of this market news, I would say, topic is, of course, the conflict that is in the region between Israel and Lebanon, Gaza. While the conflict with Lebanon and Gaza had little impact into the oil and gas market, the tension between Israel and Iran are quite massive. And of course, as soon as something is happening, and here I put you 2 articles from Reuters with just 22 hours difference, as soon as something is happening before the market could see quite a stability and the oil price was going down. As soon as you have missiles or an attack, the price is going to the roof again. So it's really tense, this situation. I would say that my take, it will not move before the US election. After the US election, okay, it might change. We might see a lot of stuff happening. For all of us, will be quite close because Abu Dhabi and ADIPEC is, I would say, on the first rank to see what is happening. But clearly, we see that Iran is trying to diffuse the tension with Israel. I would say play it cool in a funny way, but it's clearly not the strong point today of Iran, especially if we look at our business of oil and gas and energy. Iran has quite weak link, sorry. For example, they have the Karga Iceland, which is a terminal, an exporting terminal where 90% of Iranian oil is passing by. So of course you can imagine that it's a huge target for Israel. The second point, and where it can really become a huge mess, is because as soon as Iran is under attack, the first reaction they have is usually to block and to close the Strait of Hormuz, which is this area. And just through this area is passing 20% of the oil and gas globally. So you can imagine the impact that it could have to have this situation in the region, because of course it would be massive impact on the market. And while the Russian-Ukraine situation was quite a pain point for Europe, mostly Europe, here it will be a global pain point for everybody. So we'll see, we'll update, but keep that in mind. Let's cross the finger that nothing much more complex happen, but we have to bear this in mind, of course. Jack?
Yes, thank you, Jean. Let's start with let's say putting a figures behind the feeling that everybody knows. The region is basically the home of the national oil company. Just a reminder, we make the difference between IOCs, international oil company that are containing all the majors, Chevron, BP, Shell, these guys that you know, and the national oil companies that belong to a state. And here in the region, as you can see, the NOCs here are the red. They basically take all the donut. So more than 80% of the business is done by them in the region, and that's has a quite impact. The first big difference between these two type of companies is their investment strategy. The NOCs they invest on long term. They invest to make their country grow, to make grow their economy, and to ensure they also their sovereignty. I don't know if you remember during COVID, the strategy between these two companies were completely different. When the IOCs just basically hit the brakes during that period, the NOCs did the opposite and accelerate and kept investing, and they basically acted like a central bank to keep the business going on. So their strategy is completely different. Still, it doesn't mean that they purely and only invest inland. They can go overseas, and that's the graph that you can see on the top left corner. Basically, in the region, a third of their investment is done overseas. A part is done in Africa because it's basically next door to them, and the other part is done in Asia, mainly in India and in China. To put in perspective, also with what Jean said before on the price war that is going to happen most probably in China. When we talk about NOC, some names that comes to mind, obviously Aramco, Saudi Aramco, Qatar Energy, ADNOC, and their all variation of ADNOC are basically the ones playing here. And on the left, you can see the map. As a reminder, one green dot is a project currently active in the database. So you can see how active the region is and actually the geography. We will share later on also the map of the area with the resources that you can see that basically you can put over this map of projects that are completely linked. Let's focus now on, let's say, on three key NOCs. First one being Aramco. Just to put to give some figures and to put a bit of perspective of what we talk here. When we talk about market cap, just to see the size of the company, Aramco is around 1.8 trillion US dollars. And if you sum up the six major that are Exxon, BP, Shell, Total, Chevron, and Conoco, you don't even reach that market cap altogether. You reach 1.3 trillion US dollars. So just to put in perspective how big and financially powerful is Aramco. Actually, they may be the major now. And last figures also to better understand their financial power. In a year, they make basically 300 billion US dollar, which means that with the money they made on a year, they can buy Total overnight. Just to put in perspective some numbers. In terms of projects, they basically have large projects and smaller projects. The smaller projects, they are called CRPOs, standing for Contract Release Purchase Orders. Usually these projects are between 200 and 300 million US dollar. Some are going up to $800 million, but that's not the vast majority of them. And they number them one by one. I think currently we are around 140 or 150 number of CRPOs. On the right, you can see, let's say, the business card, let's say, of Saudi Aramco. So they invest quite a lot in petrochemical. That's 60% of the investment now that are in petrochems. Most of them are in the region, but you can see in the yellow part on the second donut the share that they took in Asia Pacific, and that's mainly also China and India, as Jean explained, to secure their wholesales. And finally, just one slide before Jean, just one thing I want to say. Thanks. It's where the feed are being done, and you can see they are done massively locally, and we'll explain a bit later on that because there is a need also. Doesn't mean that they do it only themselves, sorry, but mostly US and European countries, but from offices over there. Moving now to ADNOC and Qatar Energy. They have, let's say, common ground here. It's their growth of investment over the years. Basically, over 10 years, they tripled their investment. It's not an exponential growth that we have, for example, in Europe, pushed by energy transition. That's not it, but it's a constant and steady growth over the years, and driven by Petrochem and oil and gas. ADNOC is actually quite active on Petrochem. They recently acquired Covestro, a majority of Fertiglobe, and a big part of Borealis. And Qatar Energy, on the other hand, is also taking the opportunity of sending gas to Europe, following the war that we had between Russia and Ukraine, that left them a boulevard to sell. And moving then to the market specification, maybe Jean, you can explain a bit more the specificities of this region.
Yes, thank you, Jack. We wanted to make a part which is a little bit more dedicated to the business. If you're attending this webinar, it's because you are at least interested by this market, or you are already an expert of this market, but it's just to put in mind where this market is standing. The first thing that this market, if you look at on the global scale along the years, along the last 10 years, the market share has been quite stable, meaning that in 2016 it was representing 60% of the market, with about 50 projects being awarded and 38 billions. Along the years, those market share has been quite stable. It's growing, I would say, more recently since 2024, 2025, and for the forecast also in 2026, is going more or less to 20% of the market globally, which is happening in the region. And you see the number of projects has been more or less doubling on the last 10 years, and the capex has more or less quadrupled in the meantime. It's not that the projects are just more giant, but of course, by the simple effect of project doubling, you have twice more capex, and also the price of the project in 2016 compared to next year are quite different because of inflation. Sometimes the project can be twice as more expensive, even if it was the same project. So, as you can see, Middle East is quite stable. They are now having, I would say, a long-term lean growth to I would say, grow their market share and grow their investment in project, not only in the region but also overseas. So it's quite interesting to see this market developing, because at the end, I mean, we are talking about 180 billions next year. Just this morning is a figure of capex being awarded this year in Middle East was about 130 billion. So you can imagine how much money is going on, how much business opportunities are there for you. But this market is quite complex, and as Jack mentioned, we like to start from the beginning where the resources are. And when we say resources, we start by oil and gas, because, I mean, not everything is everywhere. In another, I would say, words, you see on the map here, each red dot is a gas field, and those gas fields only appear either on Iran, either this giant North Field in Qatar, and that's more or less the only two countries in the region we have access to gas. UAE has a little bit of gas around the northern part, but mostly, and most of the gas of the region belongs to Qatar, and some is produced also by Iran. For oil, the situation is a little bit different because, of course, Saudi Arabia has just giant reserves, but also Iraq, UAE, so does Oman, Iran, and Syria as well. So it's a little bit more balanced, but it's also always, I would say, linked to, I would say, two diagonals, as it's said. One is linked to the Persian Gulf, and the other one is linked to the Caspian Sea, where you see, I would say, all the reserves. So that's why you have such a concentration. It's because you see, I mean, popping up field all around the planet. So the business you are interested in really depends on, I would say, your specificities, your reference, because if you are interested by the gas market, obviously it's not the same. If by your product or your experience you're interested by the gas market, it's not the same country as for the oil market. And the project type is also a little bit different. Because if we split in a database the project in terms of capex, today you have 42%, which is directly linked to oil and gas. You have 25, 26%, which is linked to Petrochem, and you have 1/3 of the market there, which is linked to energy. Energy being, I would say, a little bit broader scope, but Jack will explain in a minute. So the market is not distributed as most of people, I would say, imagine, because intuitively all the people are saying, oh, okay, it's mostly oil and gas, even downstream is not so big there. No, today the Middle East market is really a mature market where we see the three categories, like you could see in US, like you can see a little bit differently in Europe. But what is quite important to have in mind when you look at projects in Middle East is that they are giant. They are giant for two reasons. One is because the average capex is 1.5 billion, and here it means it's 50% bigger than the overall global average, where we are just below the billion US dollar usually. So you can imagine that just on average, the projects are quite bigger already by nature. But Middle East is also the home of giant project. But when I say giant, it's giant project. I put you, I would say, for example, here, SABIC is making Ras Al Khaimah refinery, and it's a ticket of 19 billions, and it's one project. You have Qatar Energy, which is the development of North Field. Okay, it's a series of different projects and different package, but it's in total 30 billions as well. The project Amiral Satorp by Aramco is quite big, and I know you can take Borouge as well, which is giant. And those projects always start the same. Usually it's one feed, okay, which is passed to a company, and then it's splitted in several EPC packages. Of course, in the database, we follow them separately, but each package is going to be 2 billion, 3 billion, sometimes 4 billions each. So it's quite massive. And those packages are distributed to different contractors, different companies, and they go to different dynamic as well. So it's quite specific because it means that if you want to be on the vendor list, you need to go on those giant feed on massive vendor list, and then you need to follow which package is interesting to you into the EPC package. And sometimes you can have up to 8, 9, 10 EPC different packages, which are going to different companies, different countries, and of course different dynamic as well. So it's quite important to have a good view really upfront, even if the project seems too big for you, to still be invested, because at the end, from all the packages, there are some which might be at your size, even if you're not used to make a billions project, but you always have side, I don't know, utilities or cooling or water treatment unit, which are more in your size. So it's quite important also to know how to play with those big programs. I mean, at this point, it's not even a project, it's a program, but to place yourself to make sure that you can also benefit from those giant, I would say, investment that are going to drive a lot of business along the years. One point which is also important to have in mind in the region, normally, naturally, you have it in mind, but we like to repeat it. When you are trying to develop business in the Middle East, you have to take it one country at a time. Because it's clearly not the same to do business in UAE that it is in Bahrain, that it is in Kuwait or Iran. And here you have to choose one market. And mostly when you choose one market, it's because of your preferences, because of contact, because of many parameters of your product or your offer sometimes. But when you choose one market, it mostly means you are choosing one country and you are choosing a handful of clients, meaning you are choosing the nationally owned companies which are operating in this country. And from that, you can go to your project. So that's really a long process to choose, but it has to be done really precisely. You can also do it the other way around, select the project which are interesting to you, and then select the country you are going to work with. 2 points which are quite important to mention when you are selecting your country, it's Iran and Yemen. You know that Iran is under a huge ban from US, and Yemen is in a total messy war for decades now. And of course, if you start to work with those countries, you have to have in mind that it will forbid you to work with many Western markets. I mean, if you are starting to export to Iran, don't even think about exporting to US. Okay, it will never work. So you have to be careful in your choices. It's not true everywhere, and it's not true forever neither, because I'm sure for those who are more experienced here, you have been used to work with Iran, and it's no more the case. But it's part of the deal. Maybe it will come back, maybe it won't come back. One point which is quite important in the region is to use agents and local partners. Why? Because you are going to benefit from it. Okay, you have cultural insight about the country, but I'm sure in your own international team you may have people which have already this culture in place. But it's really more important to have good connection, and it can be vital because I mean when we are talking about nationally owned companies, most of those companies they answer to their own government. Okay, so it means that the project and your success in the project can really depend on your contact into those governments, into those national companies. And when we say government in Middle East, I mean there is not so much democracy there. So we're not talking about elected government, but more about reigning families. I would say sheikh, kings, how they prefer to be called. And here it can be really a family game to say, okay, but this partner has a connection in this part of the family, blah, blah. So can really be the success of your business or be a huge pain point for you as well. So also be careful about the agent and local partners you are going to select. It's, I would say, a plus, but it's also mandatory. If you take Saudi Arabia, UAE, Kuwait, and Qatar, by law, you need to operate in joint ventures as soon as you are going there with a local partner. There are some exceptions, especially in UAE when you're operating from free zone. It doesn't mean that you can do whatever you want, but at least it's opening up. It's opening up in all those countries. And you have Bahrain and Oman, which are a little bit on the side because here you can operate 100% with your, I would say, company, with your own ownership. But let's have in mind that having a local partner and a local presence really helps to, I would say, limit the risk that you can have, not only with regulation, but also when you have pain points, because we are all used to run project and sometimes it doesn't go as smooth as we expected. And when you start to have, I would say, a tough discussion with the people locally, it's better to leave them discuss between locals than you involving yourself as a foreigner because okay, there's been a lot of example of cases of passport being taken and people being, I would say, locked into the country before being able to solve this issue to make the project advance. So it's really important to have in mind. And that's why when we help ourselves to go in those regions, we try to push you to have agents, local partners, and to be decisive in the decision to who you should go after. The last point we wanted to discuss about this is, of course, the in-country value and the local content. I would say it was not so important many years ago, but it has gained momentum, and now it's becoming quite a big thing in the region. Why? The first reason is because, I mean, the locals have understood that oil and gas won't be there forever, okay? And when you are this kind of company, and when we say long term, it's really long term, and they're starting to plan today the vision of their country for, I would say, the end of the century, and they want to develop their local economy, they want to develop the skills of their own population, trying to diversify, I would say, their economy and trying also to grow their local economy. I mean, 20 years ago, there were not so many things to do in those regions. And today, if you go to Qatar or Saudi Arabia, every weekend you have an event, you have a Formula One, you have a tennis, you have whatever is happening or may happen on the planet. And it's really a push for them trying to attract people, to attract skills, and also to develop, I would say, an economy which is not only standing on oil and gas. Of course, the local content and in-country value really depends country per country, and here we listed them, and it really depends the setup of the country. Because if you are, for example, and here we can take the two extreme examples, which are Qatar and Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has a huge population. Okay, so of course, when you are making even a lot of money from oil and gas, you cannot distribute this money to everybody, and everybody is super happy about it. No, people need to work. People need to industrialize their own country, and that's why the last release of in-country value for Saudi Arabia is targeting 70% of local content. Clearly, they want to build everything and create all the value from oil and gas directly in their ground. UAE, they are trying to push and go forward for more local content, but the target is set for 2030, and they are targeting 50%, but they're not sure if they will be able to do it because they are missing a lot of workforce to be able to achieve this target in 2030. For Qatar here, clearly it's not so much a problematic for the moment. The in-country value is really low, to be honest, because I mean clearly they don't have the population to handle all the project and all the volume of project they are having. And today, in-country value only gives you edge to contractors, so not even to OEMs. And honestly, it's not a key point into the development of project. For Oman, for Kuwait, and Bahrain, the situation is a little bit the same. The figure is different, but what they are targeting is not so much in-country value, but mostly for contractors to hire local people. Okay, so really to give a straight job of as a construction, as worker on construction, and then in maintenance to their population. And here you have for Oman 40%, for Kuwait 50%, and for Bahrain 25%, where you need to hire local people. Okay, here the idea is just to give job to the population, to train them, to develop their skills, of course, to run smoothly the operation and not to see arrive a colony of people from other country. So it's quite important, and it really reflects also a little bit the situation of all those countries into this business. For the project outlook, I'll give it to Jack.
Thanks, Jean. Let's start maybe by the forecast, what we see in the region. Here you can see that basically since COVID, it's ramping up every year. Energy transition is also growing, but it's not explaining itself the growth in demand. Oil and gas, petrochem are growing year on year. As a reminder, if the curve slows down on the following years, doesn't mean that the market will collapse. Just reflects that the projects we know today. But the particularity of the problem is that the region is not the only one growing. Europe is growing, US is growing. Every region is growing for different reasons, obviously. So they are facing also the same issue in terms of a bottleneck in the supply chain or in the contractor capacities. And if we look actually at the awarded EPC, we can see that two things. First, a part will have to be delayed because they won't be able to achieve everything on the year. And secondly, when we look at what has already been awarded for next year, for 2025, we are already extremely low, and the year hasn't even started yet. We are almost at the level of the full year of 2024 or 2023. So it's really having a lot of issues in terms of supply chain. Now, if we look at the footprint, as we saw before, most of the FEED and EPC are done locally in the region, in the Middle East, but done most of the time by foreign countries who have also an office locally to perform the work. This is also pushed by what Jean explained in terms of in-country values. To be noted, the growth in Asia Pacific in their share in the business, and especially in terms of EPC contract, which you see more and more now, Chinese EPC contractors, because as we said earlier, they need, let's say, to recycle, reuse their yuan, and that's a way to use it, is to go for EPC contractors. In terms of manufacturing, doesn't change that much because they still need and buy the same top quality product. They don't want yet to go on Chinese manufacturers, so that's not a threat. And so far, the EPC contract are making so much money on the execution that they are fine by providing the usual manufacturers. If we look now at the EPC that has been awarded per family and per month, first, we see that the oil and gas, okay, with some variation, but it's basically lean throughout the year. There are constant investment because these are the results of a long-term perspective. So the investments are going through the year. For Petrochem and Energy Transition, it's not so much the case. It's sometimes consequences or an opportunity. We can think about NEOM. So they decided to go for the NEOM project. And as a consequence, they will need to have solar panels and water desalination. So this is why these projects popped up, more as a consequence or as an opportunity than really as a long-term strategy, or not like oil and gas. In terms of who is actually being awarding these projects, not so much of a surprise. Here, the NOCs are driving the game. There is no seasonality, as you can see. There is no seasonality as you can find from some AOCs. They don't have any counts to give, so they can do and follow their own agenda. The thing is that AOCs are not completely, let's say, ghost over here. They are just not operate under their name. So most of the time when they are in the region, they are part of joint venture. And the green part that we see, that is representing actually the independence. Most of the time, these independents are on renewables activities, and working on the power purchase agreement projects. Let's look at energy transition because it could be a bit misleading, and let's look actually at the type of projects or type of application more accurately on the region. When we talk about energy transition in the Middle East, it's mainly power gen, water treatment, and solar application. They trust, as you can see on the chart, most of the application. We are not here as we see in Europe and US, looking at carbon capture application or green hydrogen application. Not so much. It's massively these projects. Still, they invest yet in ammonia and hydrogen. Just to also provide information on these two applications, half of them are in Oman. They, as you can see on the map, they don't have gas reserves, gas resources. They are not so much on the oil, and they don't want to miss the turn of the next energy that will be hydrogen, ammonia, whatever the form it is transported. And the region anyway wants to go on this direction, but they are not going now because they know that to be able to achieve and to provide the level of production they want to do in the future, they will need to have big projects because they will supply every of this country plays to supply 10% of the global green hydrogen demand. So, and they can't do it now. We know that we have some difficulties actually providing, let's say, going over 100 megawatts of electrolyzers, and that's not sufficient for them to achieve their goals. So they will most probably go later on when we have the knowledge to go on big projects. What they're currently doing is actually lining up also the water and the solar photovoltaic. So they have the water for the green hydrogen and the electricity for that same application. Jean, I'll let you conclude on what we said, and then we will have the Q&As.
For sure, Jack. Thank you for it. I went a little bit too fast with the slide, I guess. But just to re-explain a little bit, few points on higher level. Clearly, Middle East is dominating. Is a dominating region for oil and gas. It's one of the, I would say, few hubs for energy, if not the hub for the global energy in oil and gas. And this position of, I would say, energy provider for the world, they want to keep it clearly, and they want to remain as the energy provider for the world in the future. And if the energy is changing, they will adapt to provide this energy. And that, as Jack mentioned, that's why they are scaling up their investment into green electricity and water, because they are estimating that somehow, at some point, the market will be about green hydrogen or any version of it. And if world wants green hydrogen, they will produce green hydrogen. So clearly what is specific is the NOCs, and behind the NOCs, their government, okay? Those NOCs, national companies, are not, I would say, just random companies just acting to manage their balance sheet and their shareholders at the end of the day. They are driven by government, and government, which are, I would say, long-term government. So they are driving projects also in this long-term perspective. Clearly, they want to prepare their country, and they are, I would say, a little bit responsible for their country. So the dynamic and the decision process is also a little bit different. This market is giant. It's clearly a good market for OEMs, for contractors, because the margins are quite good, the projects are quite well. Of course, it has a cost because it's a market which is complex to enter because of regulation, because of connection, and also now because of in-country value, which are quite specific to be followed. But it's still a market which is worth going, even if we see more and more Chinese contractors in the region, because Chinese contractor doesn't mean that they are coming with a lot of Chinese suppliers. Most of them try to, I would say, compensate their maybe lack of quality with the best material. So we see a lot of Chinese contractors using the best equipment in class. So for you, it could be also quite interesting to go after this project. Nevertheless, we want to highlight two, I would say, two red flags. The first one is, of course, the risk, which is currently going on into the region, because we have gone through, I would say, 2 years ago, a European crisis of energy. And now we are, I would say, on the edge of a Middle East crisis of energy. And it should remain the situation at least for a year, because either it will start up and then it will be a huge mess, either the tension will remain high for at least a year, and then we will see. So a lot of projects should be looked at following that. Oil and gas, I think, and all the energy transition projects Jack mentioned, they should be executed on time. First, because oil and gas, it's really a long-term perspective. So whatever happens, usually those projects are done and done more or less on time. For energy transition, it's a little bit a race to scale up and develop the right asset for supply. So here also we can expect those projects to be done on time. But for Petrochem, it's a question mark. As the market for petrochem product is slowing down quite massively today, a lot of projects have been questioned by Aramco and by ADNOC, also knowing that they have made a lot of effort on the last 2 years, trying to acquire assets and develop new assets in China and India, trying to protect their market. So today we are maybe entering a slowdown from all the effort that they made before. So it's also quite important to have in mind when you are going to select the project you are going after. And to conclude, see you next week for the lucky one in Adipec to enjoy, I would say, the heat and the weather there. You're pleased to visit our booth in the French pavilion. It's all 9, so it's right in the middle. You can't miss it. And it's number 9355. So feel free to shoot us an email if you are passing by to make sure that we'll be on the spot. And it will be our pleasure to chat with you and discuss with you and take the time to discuss about the market.